Hi, this is Plus Pedal from GameChanger Audio, and this is SUPEREGO Plus from Electro Harmonics, and they're both pedals that hold or freeze or give infinite sustain to instruments fed through them. This can be particularly useful for instruments that have a quick natural decay like a piano or a guitar, but also as kind of a technique for adding polyphonic-like capabilities to instruments that are either monophonic, like a flute or saxophone, or have limited polyphony, like a guitar. Say, for example, to freeze a chord and then play on top of it. The way they work is by sampling a snippet of a sound played through them and looping it. They do, however, work and sound slightly differently. In this video, I'll start by comparing their basic feature sets and then feed them several types of instruments to see how they stack up sonically. I'll be using sampled pianos, electric guitars, and orchestral instruments from multiple companies, including Native Instruments, Ableton Arturia, and Spitfire Audio, so we'll have a broad range of sounds to look at. Let's start by looking at what these pedals have in common. In their most basic modes, you feed them any sound you like, whether a single note or a chord, and the instant you press the main pedal or stomp switch, they'll sample a snippet of the sound and repeat it until you release the pedal. Their most basic mode is kind of like a Sostenuto pedal on a piano, not the sustain pedal. So you play a chord, you can hold it, and play on top of that. That's actually Sostenuto and not sustain, though you can get a sustain-like effect on both. Both let you swap out textures as you go, so I could start with one chord, play on top of that, play another chord, then swap that out. Both also let you set an attack and decay or rise and tail for the incoming texture sound. So with a short rise or tail or a short attack or decay, right, this sound will immediately come in and immediately stop when I release the pedal. With a slow rise and a long tail, the sound will gradually come in, and then when I release the pedal or stomp switch, it'll slowly fade out. Both these pedals are different from another genre of sustain pedals that use compressors, which can also provide additional sustain and perhaps even sound more organic, but they can't provide infinite sustain, and you can't play over held notes using a compressor pedal. These pedals are also very different from reverb pedals with an infinite sustain. Reverb pedals typically sit at the end of the effects chain, and if they have freeze, you can't typically play on top of that unless they're dual buffer reverb pedals like the Ventris Reverb or the H9 from Eventide. These pedals work very well at the beginning of your effects chain. They capture your sound, and then you can apply modulation effects like tremolo to the frozen sound or distortion. Another thing that both these pedals have in common is that the timing with which you press the sustain button matters. If you press it too early during the attack stage of a sound, you'll get a slightly distorted or odd or tremolo style sound. Whereas if you wait about half a second, you'll get a cleaner sound. Both have control over the level of the dry and wet signal. In the Plus pedal, it's in the form of a dry-wet knob, and in SUPEREGO Plus, you have two knobs, one for the level of the dry sound and another knob for the level of the effect or the wet sound level. In general, I prefer a single dry-wet knob because it's a faster way to control balance as opposed to using two knobs. However, Plus pedal doesn't have an overall level control knob, which is something you can do indirectly using the dry and effect knobs on the SUPEREGO Plus. We're getting to the differences very soon. The last way that both of these are similar is that both have sends and returns for external effects. Since both pedals sample a very small portion of the sound and loop it, the sound tends to get a little bit monotonous, and it's nice to apply additional modulation effects to it. You can use the send and returns on both pedals to do that. So let's talk about how they're different. SUPEREGO Plus has a much broader effects section, whereas Plus pedal has a much simpler filter style option. So if you take a sound and hold it, I picked a relatively bright sound. If the sustain knob is all the way clockwise, it'll try and mimic the sound as closely as possible. As you close the sustain knob, it acts sort of like a low-pass filter, a gradual low-pass filter applied to the sound. So sound will typically start bright, then sort of close down very gradually based on the position of this knob. SUPEREGO Plus has a broader palette of effects, obviously, as you can see here. I'll turn them on. It does have a filter with resonance, a pitch shifter, and various other modulation options. So certainly a nice plus for SUPEREGO Plus. Both pedals support getting a little help from external foot switches. Plus pedal has an optional wet button that will cut out the dry signal, allowing you to toggle the dry part of the signal in and out and gradually bring in textures with the dry signal silent. It's not a must. You can set the pedal just to fully wet and have the same effect, but you won't be able to toggle a certain middle dry wet position and fully wet position. SUPEREGO Plus has both support for an expression pedal as well as a foot switch extension for its buttons so that you can control it with your foot and keep the pedal on a desktop. An expression pedal lets you either control one of the effects parameters or transition between two presets, meaning two sets of knob panel positions. I made a whole dedicated review of SUPEREGO Plus where I demonstrate that. I'll link to it in the description. Now, while Plus pedal doesn't have external expression control, unlike SUPEREGO Plus, which just has an on-off stomp switch, the pedal on Plus pedal actually has two distinct positions, fully pressed and somewhere in the middle, and this gives you two levels of control, of level control, either 50% or 100%. So I can choose to freeze this sound at full level, go to half, go back to full, half, and turn it off. So a nice touch with built-in expression control here. Both pedals let you sustain sounds infinitely without pressing the pedal. On Plus pedal, just move the tail to infinite, then hold a chord, right, sustain it. It'll just keep holding forever until you either shorten the tail or just tap quickly. With SUPEREGO Plus, the length of the decay is kind of limited to about that, but if you move it into latch mode, you can get a very similar effect. So freeze a note, latch it forever, and then double tap to start the decay process. Okay, let's talk about layering. Both pedals offer it, but they implement it in different ways. Plus pedal has up to 5 different sound layers that it cycles through every time you freeze a new sound, and if you like, you can reduce that number down to 1. Each layer is its own sort of separate entity. It has its own rise and tail, and if you turn tail fully clockwise, the layers won't decay, but rather stay active forever or until you stop them. I'll show you the concept of the 5 layers on Plus pedal using a sine wave because that's the easiest thing to see on the scope. So let's say hold one note. And this is held infinitely because tail is set to infinite, but I could have had it decay if I wanted to. Let's add another note to it. Then another note. Another note. So these are 5 layers. Now if I add another layer, notice what happens to the first one. Let's do this. It drops out. Let's add another one. So the older layers drop out while the newer ones come in. Now you can also undo layers just by short tapping. And you can always silence them all with a strong tap down. Plus pedal also has a single and group mode, which is only relevant if the tail isn't set to infinite. In single mode, holding the pedal down will only hold the last layer. Right? So I can record one, then add another one. If I keep this down, the older layers will gradually die down. If I put it in group mode, 2 things change. First, this knob now determines the number of layers. Turning it all the way clockwise will give you 5 layers. As I turn it counterclockwise, you'll also see this LED blink to show that you've got less layers active, all the way down to 1 layer if you want. But let's keep it, say, at 5 layers. The additional benefit of group mode is that you can hold layers and prevent them from dying down as you add them. And when you release the pedal, they'll get their natural decay as usual, but I'll shorten it so we'll see it. Right. but as long as you hold the pedal, all layers will be held rather than just the last one in single mode. So that's layering in Plus pedal. Layers in SuperEgo Plus work more like a traditional delay pedal. When you record a new layer, the level of the previous layer will be reduced based on the position of the layer knob. So when it's fully clockwise, the previous layer's level won't be reduced at all. When it's halfway through, it'll stick around at half level. And when it's all the way counterclockwise, you basically won't retain anything from the previous layer. SuperEgo Plus uses the threshold knob to determine whether it's time to create a new layer. When threshold is all the way clockwise, any sound will create a new layer, and then this acts sort of like a gate. All the way down here, you'll need very loud sounds to create new layers. So let's see how this works across some of SuperEgo's modes. Aside from the momentary mode, which is sort of like how this works, you have a sustain mode where both these LEDs are on. In this mode, SuperEgo Plus will behave sort of like a sustain pedal on a piano. So these are my piano sounds, and they die down very quickly. If I hold it, it'll keep on adding layers. Each of these subsequent notes is basically added to the main buffer at the layer level. So if this were sort of halfway, then as I added notes, the previous note would die down. So you'd only sort of get 2 or 3 notes at a time. Bring this back up, you can get multiple notes. And take it down to 0, it's basically one layer at a time. To get the same piano-style sustain effect as opposed to Sostenuto, you'd need to be in group mode, and you could layer up to 5 notes at a time. So we talked about moment mode and sustain mode, where both these LEDs are on, and then latch mode. Then there's auto mode. It's the last sort of infinite freeze mode, where it's kind of like the sustain pedal option. But if you press this down, you can play without sustaining notes, then go ahead and add notes. And double tap to get out. Another neat feature in SuperEgo Plus is Gliss. So normally layers will just transition from one to the other very quickly. But if you add Gliss, then they'll sort of glide or portamento from one to the other. Very interesting effect, considering it doesn't have any MIDI data and just takes audio and sort of glides it from one layer to the other. By the way, for the record, there's a 5th non-sustain mode in SuperEgo Plus, which just lets you use it as a multi-effects unit when all these LEDs are on. Then when you turn on the effects, they'll just be processed here based on whatever the effects do, regardless of freeze. Okay, so those are the differences between the two, but how they handle sound is the most important thing. Let's try out different types of sounds through both. Let's start with an electric guitar. This is pretty good sample from Native Instruments Sunburst Session Guitar. Let's freeze it on SuperEgo Plus. Okay. And on Plus pedal. This is with the filter wide open. Let's try it with a filter closed down. Back to SuperEgo Plus. Trying to match levels as much as possible. Back to here. So it really matters where you catch the sound. This is a different guitar sound from Ableton's library. Let's try it on SuperEgo Plus. Let's try one sound. Again, filter position obviously matters. pretty similar, I think. Let's try this with a chord. And on plus pedal. Let's move on to piano sounds. This is a piano sound with a reverb. Let's try it on plus pedal. This adds sort of like a little tremolo to it, I think. Or maybe it's the sound itself. Hear that? Compared to this. More static. Let's try a different piano. This is a brighter one. Okay, that's that tone. On plus pedal. Again, a slight tremolo. Let's try a different piano. This is the Felt una corda from Native Instruments as well. Nice gentle hold. Also, very nice. A little tremolo actually adds a bit of life to it, but bit here too. So up until now, fairly similar. Where they start to get different, I think, is where we move into the next sounds. This is a waveform from a synth. Let's try SUPEREGO Plus. Changes it quite a bit. Let's check out plus pedal. I can open this up. Pretty similar. Slightly less harmonics, but closer, I think, than this. Gotta turn off Gliss. Let's try the simplest sound, a sine wave. Let's try plus pedal. Pretty precise. Okay, and SUPEREGO Plus, also precise, but very pronounced, fading in and out of the level. Try a chord. You can see it's much stabler now with a chord as the different harmonics play out. Let's try this on plus pedal. Of course, dry wet levels. Of course, what would synths be without a square wave? Again, quite different waveforms on SUPEREGO Plus, and let's check out plus pedal. Don't just look at the waveforms, listen to the sound as well. Slightly more metallic here. So those are synth sounds. Let's go to a few orchestral sounds. These are from Spitfire Audio. Let's start with SUPEREGO Plus. Okay, let's try the same sound on plus pedal. It seems like the natural vibrato of the sound is tripping it up. The way this sample is originally played is causing this pulsating artifact in plus pedal. Let's try a different sample, also from Spitfire Audio. Yeah, again, let's try this on SUPEREGO Plus, same sample. It also can't imitate the vibrato, but is smoother. Let's try a slightly different sample. It seems like SUPEREGO Plus can handle changing timbres a little bit more fluidly. That's a pretty good one. Let's try this out. Yeah, again, the cycle here seems to be shorter or less blended. Let's try a lower tone. Again, that frozen repetition. Let's try that over here. More fluid here for sure. So it seems like SUPEREGO Plus is doing better on this natural sampled cello sound. I also added a physical modeled cello. Obviously, it sounds very different from an orchestral sample. Let's try this one out. And on plus pedal. Yeah. Handles this very nicely. Let's try a trombone. This is from Ableton's library. Try it on plus pedal. Nice on the low level. Okay, let's try this on SUPEREGO Plus. Let's move on to a saxophone. Again, this has tremolo, so I can predict. Yeah, not great. Let's try plus pedal. So for both, you really want to give them a clean sound rather than something that has modulation going on. Let's finish this out with tubular bells, why not, on SUPEREGO Plus. Nice. And on plus pedal. You can hear that tremolo that it adds. Really matters where you catch it. Let's maybe try and add a little filter to this. Nice. So turning down the filter does make things sound more natural here. Okay, so let's summarize and talk about the pros and cons of this infinity war. First and foremost, I think the most important thing is freeze quality. Hopefully the examples that I showed you before help you figure out if either of these works for the type of instruments you play. I don't think there's a clear winner. It seemed pretty close to me on the guitar and piano sounds. I think Plus pedal was way closer to the original with the synth style sounds, meaning sounds that don't have a lot of ongoing modulation, generally making them slightly darker though, compared to SUPEREGO Plus that made them a bit brighter and metallic. It seemed like SUPEREGO Plus handled sounds with a bit of ongoing modulation a little bit better, like the string sounds. Neither did very well with the saxophone, which had a lot of modulation. And of course, please feel free to write down in the comment section what you think. Aside from their infinite sustain capabilities, on the feature set side, SUPEREGO Plus has the advantage of having onboard effects, gliss and threshold detection, as well as a few control modes, whereas Plus pedal has the advantage of undoing layering and both the form factor and the dual stage half press, full press option in the control pedal. So that's pretty much it. If you found the information here useful, you might want to check out my book, available to people who support the work done on this channel on Patreon. Hit like if this comparison was useful, and ring the bell after subscribing if you don't want to miss the next one. Thanks for watching.